Okay, here we go.
Here we go. Hello and welcome to Dateline London. In a week which has seen hundreds of protesters killed in Egypt, raising questions about the prospect for a democratic future. We will be devoting most of today's programme to those issues, but we will also take a look at the European economy with increasing optimism for a recovery. We'll discuss that. But today my guests are Janet Daly of the Sunday Telegraph, Nabila Ramdani, who is an Algerian journalist and commentator, Marc Roche of Le Monde, and Abdallah Homouda, who's a Middle East writer and broadcaster. So first to Egypt, where at least 80 people died yesterday in clashes between the interim government forces and supporters of President Morsi. Not so much an Arab Spring then, perhaps more of an Arab winter? Abdallah, you are in and out of Cairo a lot. Just give us your take on what's happening at the moment.
I was concerned yesterday when I was told that I would come to the program, because I felt that I could be a lone voice in a tide of Western media which is barraging Egypt these days. I find it really difficult to say that everything is accusing the military, accusing the security forces, and exonerating the culprit, who is the Muslim Brotherhood. There are 350,000 members, well organized, abide by obedience and commitment, well trained, and a wing of them is well armed, and they have taken on the security forces from the very beginning. They massed their members in two areas around Cairo. They made life difficult for everyone. Everyone forgot that there were 45 days of agitation, contrary to the narration in the West. In the West, they played on the fact that they are against the military and for democracy. And in Cairo, they were speaking about the Islamic State and the Islamic identity of Egypt, and that the Western democracy is a heretic civilization. They spoke about the Copts Christians in Egypt as a casual citizens. Casual citizens could go anywhere, but Egypt is for them only and not for everyone else. It is amazing that the left and the right, both in the West, are so naive, or they have their own self-interest. Yeah. The Egyptian people are beginning to feel under attack, xenophobic. Sorry, I can't read the word. Xenophobic. I'm so stressed because of the situation, to the extent that I find it even difficult to speak in Arabic because of the unfairness of the situation. The military just set the scene to reboot the democratic process. The new president is, by the default constitution, the head of the constitutional court. So he came. A new government has been appointed of technocrats who are well respected around the world, and the army is guarding from as far away as possible, leaving the security forces to direct the situation. The 45 days of agitation threatened everyone. We either control you or kill you, and encouraging their own members to play martyrdom and embarrass the Egyptian authorities in the world. What I can say is not enough. I have a list of 45 churches around Egypt which were burned. What is happening in killing is up and down the country. It is not between the security forces and the Muslim Brotherhood and their allies. It is between the Muslim Brotherhood who are attacking people. Today I'm going to interview an English lady who lives in Alexandria. And this lady has pictures and will give a testimony. I'm inviting Nabila to come and interview her as well, just to know what is going on from someone who is not Egyptian.
Okay, so Janet, are we seeing it very black and white from outside,
not
do you
only
think?
black and white, but I think your word naive is absolutely on the button. We were reporting, the Western media, all of the agitation that you described, that 45 days of agitation, and then suddenly when the military did step in and take control, there was a revolt against this, a bizarre sort of intellectual turnaround in which we decided that a democratically legitimate government had been displaced. Democratic legitimacy doesn't come just from being elected. Elections aren't all there is to democracy. Hitler was elected. The fact that you've been elected doesn't mean that you're committed to democratic institutions or the rule of law. When Morsi got into power, he had no mandate to create an Islamist state. That wasn't his democratic mandate, and yet that is what he proceeded to do. And there was huge mass protest about that, as you know, mass demonstrations against that. And the army stepped in to restore order. Now, admittedly, the army has done some horrendous things over the last couple of days, appalling things, and there is a terrible lack of leadership from America, particularly from the West, about how to get any sort of order back into this situation. But the idea that the Western media should suddenly be endorsing the Morsi government, this sort of Islamist government and Sharia law, as if this was what they were mandated to do when they won the election, that is an absurd situation.
So we're letting them dine from outside then, Marc?
Well, I mean, you can say that it was minimum service from the Western government. Washington didn't suspend the military. The EU won't suspend the 5 billion aid because it's a civilian aid, so the Egyptians will suffer if we cut them. There is a deep sense of unease in Europe with what's going on with the Christian minority, because Europe is mostly Christian.
We are ignoring what's going on to the Christian.
We are very worried about that, and also what's going with women in Egypt. And finally, the Muslims who live in the diaspora, the Muslims of Europe, who are much more liberal in their majority, are also worried about what's going on with the liberals in Egypt. You know, Egypt has given this marvelous art, cinema, and all that, and all this is threatened by a bunch of fanatics.
Yeah.
Nabila, how critical is this, particularly for the wider region in the Arab world?
Well, I think the fear is that the routine murder of civilians will become acceptable, and it will be viewed as almost collateral damage to the democratic process. But of course, there's nothing democratic at all about a junta, a military force running a country. But I would like to go back to Abdullah's and indeed Janet's narrative, which is so disingenuous. I mean, whatever your views about the Muslim Brotherhood, President Morsi was elected democratically. He overstepped the mark. His legacy was controversial. People took to the street to protest against it en masse, and this right and proper. This is part and parcel of the democratic process to express dissent and anger. But what is not, what is completely undemocratic, is to bring in the army, as Janet said very naively, and this word is very accurate, you know, in our discussion, the army to restore order.
But
the army is currently... Janet, you can't.
I know what you're going. Yes.
You cannot dispute the fact
that
the violence is coming first and foremost from the military.
But you're not defending it, are you?
No, of course not. But the army did put pressure before it seized, before it had a coup, before it took over.
So if people are unhappy with David Cameron's policies, you just send the army to remove him.
No.
That is not the answer.
Well, they do that in Europe, actually.
Egypt was well on course in the dark periods of history of
the
Europe.
It wasn't a democratic regime.
The army put pressure on Morsi to make
But why? Why should the army be involved in politics?
The army put pressure. The army has always been involved in Egyptian politics.
But it shouldn't.
But all right, but hang on.
That was the whole point of the Arab Spring,
Janet. The army put pressure on Morsi's government to be more inclusive, to pull back from the Islamist.
But the checks and balances shouldn't come from the army, Janet. That's the problem.
Yeah, but the political government did not give the check, isn't it? they behave like dictators.
What the army did
with an Islamic state,
the army manufactured an interim government to give the impression that they were on the side of democracy.
You are naive.
A cabinet, and discussed elections. You can't, of course, discuss election if you're excluding a huge.
They're not saying that the Muslim Brotherhood has to be excluded from the democratic process.
It's currently murdering Muslim Brotherhood supporters.
Yes, but that's because they are refusing to.
So that's a justification. No. Murder is a justification.
Let's just pause for a second. Abdallah, come back in here.
Well, I think the argument against the army intervention is like returning us in this very situation to the nursery book of politics. The army did not intervene to do anything other than to suspend what is going on. The army did not exercise any killing, and except at the situation on the 6th of July when their barracks are attacked. The first 3 to be killed were of the army. I am not.
Abdallah, army carried out murders, even including when Mubarak was removed.
No.
The army is still the main power bank.
And what about the attacks of?
Okay.
Can I finish, please?
Yes, let Abdallah finish, and then Marc, you can come in. Okay.
I have never defended the army. But the army now acted as a bailiff for the will of the Egyptian people to reclaim their country.
Hang on, even this week when hundreds of people were killed?
They were not killed by the army, they were not killed only by
That's
the No, they were not killed. The army did not intervene. The security forces were there, but please don't forget that the Muslim Brotherhood were the mass. They send the scouts to provoke people, and they are armed, and the killing comes between the people. The killing did not come only from the security forces. They provoked the security forces.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's try and find a solution to this, if there's one to be found. Marc?
I don't think we can do it in 10 minutes.
No, I don't think we can either, Janet. But Marc, let's go back to the European initiative, which has not really been much of an initiative so far. Is there any chance something can be revived there, or is it just not strong enough?
I can't see the European nation 28 agreeing on one set of rules. So what we'll do, it will be benign neglect like Washington is doing, because we are afraid of the Muslim Brotherhood and we are afraid of the Islamists.
I don't think Washington's neglect is terribly benign, actually. I think there's been a terrible failure of leadership in Washington. And Washington now is saying, obviously saying behind the scenes to the army, you've got to cool this, you've got to stop what these apparent atrocities, you've got to pull back from the brink. But at the same time, they're saying, we're not going to start denying aid, we're not going to call this a coup, a military coup, because then we would have to pull out the aid, and then the thing would just dissolve totally into chaos. But the point is that Washington let this get completely out of hand. There's no question that Washington has always pulled the strings in Egypt. And now, because the Obama administration isn't interested in foreign policy generally, and they've decided to write off their involvement in the region, they're more interested in China and all kinds of new, looking east. The situation has collapsed.
They relaunched the Palestinians, they relaunched the Palestinian-Israeli
that's John Kerry. John Kerry is running his own show there.
Okay, I want to go back to Nabila. What could be done? Who could intervene? Can it be solved on the ground? Can the Arab League do anything about it? Or is it going to take something bigger?
Well, first of all, it needs to be established very clearly that the situation is highly critical, and there's no doubting that the violence will continue to escalate, which will lead increasingly to sectarian violence, and that's why we're seeing more and more attacks on Christian churches, Coptic churches, for example, and witnesses on the ground all saying that the police forces and the army, whose number one duty is to protect civilians and Egyptian citizens, are doing anything but. And quite the opposite, they are murdering people routinely. The European Union has started to express a coalition of, to express concern, and they are talking to each other. European leaders are talking to each other, and they are meeting Monday to try and sort out this growing crisis. Mm-hmm. But let's be honest, the answer has to, it's not coming from within, clearly. It has to come from outside, and especially from the United States.
Okay.
We endlessly heard Western leaders in the context of the Arab Spring calling dictators and their military forces to stop killing people. But now, the silence, the lack of action is profoundly
Francis, what about the
disturbing.
Saudis, though? What about the Saudis, for instance? What's happened to them?
There was an extraordinary show of support for military rule in Egypt. I don't think we can look at Saudi, which is not an example of an enlightened democracy, far from it, to find a solution. But I think even if you look at David Cameron, remember during the Libya conflict, he justified the use of extreme lethal force against Colonel Gaddafi's Libya for the sake of the protection of civilian lives. Where would, one wonders, where would be the red line in the case of Egypt?
But there is
hundreds of people being murdered day in, day out by their own military. Should be
there
enough.
is no good option, because the restoration of the supposedly democratically legitimate government means an Islamist state, and nobody in the West or Saudi Arabia wants an Islamist state.
And the Egyptians don't want.
That's right.
But the Egyptians voted for the Muslim Brotherhood. Let's not forget that. What people have to bear in mind, and the Egyptians first and foremost, is they went to the ballot boxes and they have to come to terms with the outcome of democratic elections.
Hitler was elected.
You're not comparing
electing somebody who then does something that is antithetical to the mandate. They elected a government in their democratic spring, their Arab Spring, thinking they were going to get a democratic government, freedom under the rule of law, and they got an Islamist dictatorship.
But I agree with that. But the work that needs to be done is to create a culture of democracy, and it's going to take time.
An understanding of it.
Absolutely.
Okay,
but bringing in the army is certainly not the answer.
Morsi was adamantly opposed to it.
I want to bring Abdallah back in. What is going to happen, particularly if this trickles outwards, if Egypt cannot be solved?
First, I'd like to say that this is an Egyptian problem.
Okay.
And the Egyptians don't like intervention.
But do they need intervention?
No, they don't need intervention.
So
it is a difficult
fix
situation.
Yeah.
They will fix it. There is a revision amongst a large sector of the Muslim Brotherhood to admit their mistake. They suffer from reality denial, but there are members among them revisiting their notion and re-examining what happened exactly. But it will take time.
Well, do those members, though, have the strength and authority within the Muslim Brotherhood to change any attitude?
It will take time. It is not easy. I expect Algeria in the 1990s suffered from a decade of killing. I expect that Egypt will live through 2-3 years of difficult time, assassinations or bombing or sectarian against the Christians or anything like that. But I'd like to tell you that the Egyptians are prepared to persevere and pay the price. They are very pleased that they have uncovered this plot to turn into a religious fascism before it is complete. Yeah. And this is why the 4 years term, he lacked the legitimacy halfway. In his election manifesto, he had what's called the Renaissance Project. Now, if he applied the Renaissance Project, the poor and the ignorant and the illiterate who could be educated and enriched and empowered through this program would turn against him. He forgot about it completely, and no one talked about it. The only Renaissance we had is some weakness which allowed Ethiopia to build the Renaissance Dam, which threatened Egypt with the lack of water. The Egyptian people are in a mess. They know it, but they are prepared to pay the price.
And that's why it's very important that the West does give the aid to Egypt. The 5 billion shouldn't be taken because this is civilian aid, and more than ever the Egyptian. I'm less pessimistic than you are, because Algeria had a terrible colonial war and a tradition of violence which Egypt doesn't have. So Egypt, who has always been independent, is better placed to solve that problem with our help, but we have to help Egypt and not withdraw the...
And Egypt is too important to the West. Egypt is much more important to the West than Algeria was. It can't be allowed to collapse into civil war, and it can't be allowed to infect the rest of the region with that civil war.
What would happen if it did?
It's apocalypse. I mean, that region of the world is too dangerous, too unstable. The chaos from Egypt could spread right through the Middle East.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
Nabila.
And that's why, Abdallah, with all due respect, it's not just an Egyptian problem. We can't look at Egypt in isolation. It is bound to have ripple effects, first and foremost, in the region. And as
It would make Syria.
Okay, you know, it is very strategically placed in the whole region. The Suez Canal is a major trade route.
Very briefly.
If you see it is not an Egyptian problem only because Egypt is so important, please take into account the Egyptian people. You are not taking the Egyptian people into account.
Final word?
Well, I am, because I'm very critical of the slaughter.
No, please be critical of the Muslim Brotherhood. Who generated the slaughter in the first place?
By being what? Democratically elected?
No. They agitated for 45 days. You ignore that. You live with the picture of today. You don't see it.
Over a month in Egypt.
I think people are very well informed nowadays, and I am really. I think they should be not relying on disingenuous, you know.
Okay. On that, I think we will move from Egypt. A very spirited conversation on it, and one which I think we'll probably be having for quite so many months yet, unfortunately. I want to move though to Europe, because Europe's economy is apparently showing signs of recovery for the first time since 2011, and that's according to figures released this week by the European Commission. The second quarter of 2013 showed distinct, if fragile, 0.3% economic growth collectively over the previous quarter for all the 17 countries that share the euro currency. So, Marc, is this important, or is it? Yes, I see you smiling. Are you going to claim this victory for France?
Absolutely, for Europe. I have been attacked during this program after program, by the liberal on my right. All the liberals, all the Anglo-Saxon speculators, all of them have gone, the euro is doomed. And today, rejoice. The euro is safe.
You're going to give it over enthusiasm.
0.3% growth.
Well, it's, thanks to the terrible austerity that the people of the Eurozone have suffered, thanks to the help of our German friends, the notion of solidarity, which you never understood in our European country, due respect, thanks also to the bit of quantitative easing by the European Central Bank, all this together is that the euro is saved. For the rest, we still have a long way to go.
Janet, you're steaming. You're steaming.
Right. Strip out the German economic growth, and there is no improvement in the European economy.
So it's the Germans.
The Germans.
No, France is doing very well. Holland, Austria, Scandinavia.
I'm sorry, yes. Holland is not doing well at all. And Italy, the third largest economy in the euro, is in the tank. And Spain and Greece has improved only by force majeure. I mean, the enormous act of political will and the enormous amount of money and austerity programs that have been poured into Greece have pulled it back from the brink. But Spain and Portugal, most of the Med countries, are still absolutely failing, and there is no prospect in sight.
Collapsing like you said.
Hang on. They're not collapsing because Germany has been prepared to pay for everything.
And good.
It has. Wait a minute.
It has solidarity.
It has played fast and loose with its own constitution, which does not allow it to bail out, and yet it has bailed out. It has absolutely sold out its own electorate, who are furious about the idea that they're having to subsidise all these feckless Mediterraneans. And now,
British jealousy, because their economy is a mess.
Hang on. I didn't interrupt you. No, the British economy is recovering much faster, in fact, than the European economy.
By putting money.
Yeah, exactly. How do you think the Europeans are doing it?
Well, I mean, the point, not as much as that.
The point is...
Okay, well, let's get another viewpoint on this. Abdallah, are you happy that Europe has got this 0.3%
Of course
growth?
I'm happy, because we lived under the gloom that we are going from double dip to triple dip. So what I see now is extremely important and something to smile about. It is part of the problem of convergence in Europe, actually, and that everyone is not walking at the same footing. But thanks to the Germans, and thanks to the fact that everyone is willing to concede something of their dignity and
democracy
and the pride
Sorry,
Well,
you were saying a few minutes ago that you had to take regard of the Egyptian
Of
people.
course.
You have to take regard of the European people.
Absolutely.
But
Who
the
do
European
not want,
people
hang on,
wanted
who
that
do not
euro. No,
want
hang
their-
on.
who do not
They
want
want-
their sovereignty converged,
Yes.
who do not want to lose the democratic
because
accountability
you
of
never
their government.
understood the European Union. You never understood that.
But the thing,
No, they do. They love it.
I agree with you, but I'd like to tell you that the European countries are represented in the European Parliament, and the European Parliament should express every country's view. It is very important that it is moving forward, and I think the European Central Bank should have more authority to manage and try to get the countries together.
Oh, red wags the bull here. Nabila, I want to bring you in there because nobody's going to converge, are they, quietly?
Oh, no.
Well, I think the early economic recovery is often more based on an optimistic claim rather than a reality, and the recovery that we are discussing now is not based on much at all. It's based on German and French construction, which has picked up recently, but people are already saying it's not going to last.
No. Particularly not in France.
Absolutely. And there has been a rise in export demand outside of Europe, but that's about it. Unemployment is still extremely high, across Europe, 12.1%.
26% in Italy, and even higher in Spain.
Exactly, especially among young people. So that's Arab style.
I'm going to give you 20 seconds each for a comment on the European recovery. Janet.
The problems are still intractable, and any temporary recovery is just a matter of a political phantasm.
Great, we are doing great. We are on the way to recovery, and rejoice.
Even if it's the Germans who did it?
Oh, I don't care who did it.
Abdallah.
I think the feel-good factor plays an important part in making people positive about what is going on.
Okay.
And I think learning from experiences is extremely important too.
And optimism, yes or no?
I think it's played out in the media. It's all about putting the right messages to reassure the markets and the consumers who are eventually the voters.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's it for Dateline London for this week. What can I say? You can also comment on the programme on Twitter. I'm at Maxine Mouini using the hashtag Dateline London. We'll be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye-bye.